What's up everyone? Today I want to show you how I made this Jurassic Park style chase sequence in Blender. It took all of my Blender knowledge and a few new things I had up my sleeve. So let me show you how I made it. I was watching Jurassic Park 3 the other day. I know, not the best one, but I personally enjoy it. And there's a scene near the middle end-ish area where the satellite phone was ringing inside of the Spino's belly. When the camera cuts to the Spino, it just looks so menacing, just standing there, has so much aura. So I was wondering if I could ever encounter an 8-ton theropod on my driveway. Imagine the feeling of fear and awe that you'll get. But sadly, dinosaurs don't exist anymore. Actually, I kind of retract that statement. We have a whole film franchise showing us how dinosaurs in the modern age would not really be a good idea. But I remembered, I'm a 3D artist, and I could definitely bring that to life. So, I did. The first challenge I faced was trying to get a stable shot of me running with the camera, and also make it look like I'm running for my life. I recorded a video of me and my brother running from the imaginary Spino, and funny story, on one of our first takes, there were neighbors looking at us like we were crazy, running around yelling with the phone camera outstretched in our hands, talking about some random ringing noise. But yeah, we got our good take eventually, and I think it came out pretty well. Next, I had to track the video. And since I didn't want to spend hours placing trackers in Blender only for it to inevitably fail, I again used the photogrammetry video tracker from Polyfjord. Once the scene was tracked, I used the photogrammetry importer and imported the track into the scene in Blender 4.5 LTS, because the photogrammetry importer hasn't updated to 5.0 yet. Once that was imported, I added an empty object and parented everything to it. I oriented the ground using the trackball rotation mode and aligned the X and Y axes to make sure the whole scene was placed in 3D space properly. I also scaled it to line up decently with real-world proportions, making sure 1 cube was 1 foot in real life. The video tracked much better this time because we were out in a well-lit area with pretty good conditions and a stable camera as well, even when I was running. Next, we needed the star of the show, the Spinosaurus model. I wanted a mix of the Jurassic Park 3 Spino and one of a more accurate representation of what a Spinosaurus looks like based on new findings. I found a nice already rigged model of the new Spinosaurus from Jurassic World Rebirth and imported it to my scene. By the way, I opened the track scene in Blender 5.0 now because I wanted the new features like the compositor nodes and the ACE's color transform. I then sculpted around using mainly the grab brush to have a more rounded spine, a more pronounced head, and a slimmer jaw. Then to make the color closer to the JP3 Spino, I needed the texture to be a bit more like a red and light brown color scheme with green eyes. So I imported the base texture to GIMP and added a new layer set to overlay and colored on top of the places where I wanted a different color. The overlay setting makes sure that the underlying details stay, acting more as a tintillator than a fully replaced color layer, to keep the base texture. Also, I made a roughness map for the texture because it didn't come with it. I made the insides of the mouth, the eyes, and the little fleshy parts on the side of the mouth have a very low roughness, and the teeth have about half roughness, making sure everything else was fully rough. The base normal map it came with was really good, but I just need a little more detail. So I used an inverted Voronoi texture and multiplied it by the roughness, so none of the fleshy parts will have displacement, and put it through the displacement output so that the skin will have a rough, bumpy texture to it. Finally, I also increased the subsurface to make the skin look better. I know, with a rough skin like this, the subsurface in real life would probably not be visible, but I say artistic liberties over realism. It's these subtle tweaks and additions that really sell the realism of a VFX object. So I placed the Spino in the scene and scaled it to approximately 22 feet in height when in a neutral pose and about 28 when standing up. Since the Spinosaurus in Jurassic Park 3 is like a super Spinosaur hybrid thing, it's huge, taking blows from a T-Rex and even defeating it easily. But I wanted the proportions for my Spinosaurus to be a bit more realistic, so it's a bit more of a conserved height. I needed a base lighting setup to make sure the Spino looks like it's on my street. So I found an HDRI of the setting sun to make the lighting as close as it was to the day that we shot the video, since I currently have no ways of making usable ones myself. I rotated the HDRI until it looked right, and set the brightness to make the Spino's color match the color of the scene. Since this theropod is so tall, I thought the sun should be peeking over the houses and hitting it on the top of its head and sail. Since an HDRI can't provide that sharp and precise lighting, I had to add a area light and reduce the spread very close to 0. Then I made it long and positioned it so that it only hit the head and the sail of the Spino when it's standing. Since I thought the HDRI didn't provide enough intense shadows, I added a very low intensity sunlight to the scene, just to make the shadows match better. Finally, time came for animation. Last video I said I wasn't that good at animation, but I think it still came out pretty well. But this time was a different story. Robotic movements are easy. Move a little bone here, repeat some already made keyframes, and then you're done. But with organic motion, you need to worry about asymmetric poses, non-repeated movement, and natural looking secondary movement as well. Before animation though, I had a plan. The Spino would look at us menacingly as I turn back, and then I'll take off and it'll roar at us. Then it'll start walking, and when it comes close, it'll come bend down and try to bite one of us. And when it misses, it'll roar and the video will end. So with that plan in mind, I started animating. Something I did to make it easier to animate was make a helper IK system. IK stands for inverse kinematics. The basics of it is that instead of rotating bones individually, you can use an anchor point, and Blender will calculate how much that bone, or multiple bones, will need to rotate to get to that point. So I made anchors for the head, root, and the feet, since they all move separately. Another thing that helped was looking at test footage from the Indominus Rex from ILM's YouTube channel, to see how they made their walk cycle. After that, I figured out a few things from the movie portrayals and a few things from other documentaries made on dinosaurs. 1. It seems like the movies show their head being locked in place while the creature moves, like a bird. 2. Theropods like the T-Rex and Spinosaurus' bodies are parallel to the ground, making their stance much wider and the tail necessary for stability, and to keep balance. I looked at how ILM handled the weight and balance of the Indominus Rex, and I noticed they don't just move their feet, they use their tail as a counterweight. Every time the Spino's foot hits the ground, the tip of the tail should have a slight delayed whip to it. If the tail is stiff, the whole animation is gonna look stiff and like a plastic toy. 3. I noticed that when the T-Rex walks, the hips don't just move forward, they dip and roll with the weight transfer. I tried to replicate that heavy feeling by making the body tip over when it's walking, and putting its feet close to the middle of its body when walking to keep itself from tipping over. And finally, 4. More learned from info online. Some information suggests that the Spinosaurus, unlike the T-Rex, had proportionally longer front limbs, being able to awkwardly walk on all fours. Now, while newer discoveries suggest the Spino never actually even did that, or could use that in any meaningful way, like a high schooler who wants their research paper to sound factual, I took that theoretical information all the way and integrated it to my animation. I thought it would look cool to try to eat one of us while walking on all fours, kind of like the Indominus Rex does sometimes in Jurassic World. So taking all this info into account, I started animating, but I needed some sort of template to base the animation off of. So I found a video on YouTube that shows a side view of a walk cycle that I could use as a background and a template. So I started reanimating the walk cycle, and this time I was making better progress, putting one foot after another, literally. Once the base animation was done, I needed to do some secondary motion, but I wanted it to feel random and physics-based, not like it was animated by hand. So I found this older add-on called Wigglebones 2. It basically makes it so you can animate your bones with physics and have like springy bones. Problem is, it didn't really work with Blender 5, due to a bunch of API changes and updates to the code between the 4 and 5 versions. So I went back to 4.5 LTS again. I made sure if I ever need to go back versions, I'd use the LTS versions, because most, if not all, of the newer Blender versions can talk back with the LTS versions, making it easy to hop between the versions without any file conflicts. A little known feature of Blender is you can copy and paste most objects from file to file, and even across versions. So I copied the whole dinosaur animation and pasted it into a file that was made in 4.5. I then set up the tail, secondary mesh deforms, and the hands before they were animated to have some wiggle. Once that was all calculated, I baked the animation and copied and pasted back into Blender 5 to get all that nice wiggliness. I deleted the wiggle motion for the hands at the end so I can manually animate it walking on all fours to go for the bite. It's a little messy workaround, but that's the reality of working with the newest versions while the community hasn't caught up. This Frankenstein back and forth is kind of poetic. It's like bringing old files back into the new age, kind of like what we're doing right now. Once I was happy with the animation, it was time to set up the scene to VFX it properly. The only things I really did was add a plane on the bottom to act as a shadow catcher, modeling a vague part of the bushes so the shadows look more realistic, enabling a little bit of motion blur since the video itself didn't have too much, setting the color to standard, and setting the film to be transparent. Oh, and also not a VFX-centric option, but I enabled persistent data to speed up the render a little bit. In the compositing tab, the only nodes I added was a sensor noise and a unsharp node, to make sure the image was as liquid as possible, meaning I can edit it in DaVinci later. Finally, I hit the render button and waited for it to complete. While that's being done, I want to show you how I rotoscoped my brother out of the scene. And don't worry, there isn't any paying for this solution. So I could have spent like 6 or 8 hours just manually painting my brother out of the scene. But then I remembered, I'm not just a 3D artist, I'm also a computer science student. So I'd rather spend like 10 hours coding something to do it for me rather than spending that 8 hours in actually doing it. There's a library for Python called Transparent Background. It's a bundle of helpful commands that can remove the background of any image pretty accurately. The magic here is the confidence mat. Most cheap background removers give you a binary mask. Either 1 is the subject or 0 is not the subject. That's why hair usually looks like it's cut off with a scissor. Either too much is removed or not enough is removed. But this library calculates a confidence interval. If it's only sure a pixel is 60% part of the subject, it'll set that alpha to 0.6 instead of 1 or 0. It's a soft edge which allows for the VFX object to bleed through a little bit, making it look more realistic, and it was captured on camera. The Python library, Transparent Background, is actually a wrapper for a much more complicated Python library called InSpyReNet. Yeah, kind of a handful. For a more technically inclined, InSpyReNet is a saliency object detection tool. While some people use these models for things like lane detection for autonomous vehicles or industrial computer vision, we're using it to slap transparency onto our images to make sure our object looks like it's in the scene. The only downside is that you can't really choose the subject, since the program chooses what the subject is for you, but it does work 90% of the time without much fiddle. So, I made this little proof of concept with minimal code that takes the image and spits out the transparent one, and it works scarily accurately. So I thought, perfect, a little tool that I can use to get transparency on objects that I want to put in the scene. But what if I made it better? So I went on a full-blown side quest to make a full GUI for this thing. And after a lot of failed ideas, Stack Overflow, and a little AI-assisted debugging, I made this little tool that processes images with this Python library and puts it in a nice standalone application. Link in the description. I added a few features like batch processing for image sequences so we can get video to work as well. And I added this little region of interest tool so that for single images, if it's not detecting your object properly, you can just select that region where you want your object to be transparent, and it'll force the AI in only detecting that part of the image, which fills up for the other 10% of the time that it doesn't work. So once this batch processing is done, which mind you is really quick since it uses GPU acceleration, we'll have a little transparent image sequence of only my brother that we can overlay on top of the video so that it looks like he's in front of the Spino. Next, I imported the clips into DaVinci. The image sequence of the Spino, the transparent image sequence of just my brother, and the background clip. I imported the image sequences into a separate timeline and set the duration to 1 frame. Then I dragged the timeline from the media tab into the original timeline to make sure DaVinci treats it as a clip. This makes it much easier to edit, add filters or color grading since it's all just one clip and not a bunch of images. Next came the sound design. I wanted the Spino's roar to be really loud, almost to the point of distortion. So I looked around and combined a few different sounds and layered them together to make the perfect noise. The bass sound is of a T-Rex noise that I found on YouTube. And that's the one that you basically hear normally. There is another dinosaur noise as well. It's a more low one to fill out those low frequencies, since the bass one was actually pretty high. The other sounds I used to fill the noises were the predator's clicking noise. I thought it added a good anticipation. For the bite, I found a random bite sound online and increased the bass to make it sound a little closer and more violent. The footsteps were also added to match the Spino's steps, and I made them feel like they made the ground shake. Finally, there was some dead silence between me starting to run and the Spinos starting to roar. So I recorded myself yelling "run" in my room from afar and added that in as well to make it look like I said it when I was recording. At this point, I think the sound was basically complete, but I felt the noises were too edited on. So I did the same thing as last video, and I got my speaker out and recorded it from my phone from afar so we can get that natural degradation in quality. I was looking online and I figured out there's actually a word for this process. It's called worldizing. It's a really weird word, but it basically means I can use the room's natural reflection and tones to mend the sound quality to the environment. This would have worked even better if I brought my speaker out to my driveway and recorded the sound from afar, but I don't want to disturb any more neighbors, so I just did it from my room. And finally, to pull it all together, I added just a touch of reverb in DaVinci as well. Finally, time came for the final touches. I keyframed some screen shake when the Spino takes a step, and when it bites, I just keyframed it to have about 0.5 screen shake. I also added a film look effect because I thought it looked pretty nice, and added some vignette as well. So, all this talk about the making of, but where is it? Well, I'm glad you asked because here it is. Yo, you hear that? The ringing noise?
Which ringing noise?
I really love this one. This is honestly one of my favorite things I've made in a really long time. It feels like the Spinosaurus is actually in the scene. I think I did a really good job of integrating him into the environment. And the subsurface scattering, like I said, didn't look realistic, but I think it adds so much into making it feel tangible. I also really like the sound design that I had. It may be very loud and distorted, that's why I added the sound volume warning in the beginning, but I feel like it's so much cooler. In the movies, they obviously need to take down the sound because not everyone really likes that, but I'm my own artist, I can do what I want, and I think it sounds so much cooler. I think the animation could do with a little work though. While I do like that base animation that I found online and copied, the IK rig that I made wasn't perfect. The head wasn't parented to the body so I can get that locked head motion, but the bones in the neck sometimes snap forward when the anchor is too far for the bones to go to them. So I could have added a few more keyframes in moving it back and forward, and I think that would have made it a little better, but also it would remove from that kind of locked feeling. Also, I think the material kind of looks a little cartoonish at sometimes because of the red and brown coloring that you don't really see in real dinosaur reconstructions. But overall, I am so happy with this one, and I hope you liked it too. So, if you liked this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below if you really liked this, if you had any other tips that I can use to make my renders even better. Anywho, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a nice day. Goodbye!